Welcome to Mind of the Forest, a podcast of the Louisiana Forestry Association. Hello, I'm your host, Jeff Zeringue. In Mind of the Forest, we talk about forestry, how important it is to have managed forests, and the benefits they offer for wildlife and water protection. Those benefits are why the LFA promotes keeping Louisiana's almost 15 million acres of forests as forests. And the forest products industry, including forest landowners, loggers, and wood manufacturers like lumber, paper, and pellet mills, plays an important role in the conservation and management of forests for the important renewable natural resource it is. This episode of Mind of the Forest is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office, or you can find them online at firstsouthland.com. This is episode 60 of Mind of the Forest, and we're talking with Paul Stone. Paul is a conservation forester for Crosby Resource Management, and he's also the LFA's Endangered Species Committee chairman. Every so often, we like to check in with Paul to see if there are any changes with the Endangered Species Act and how that might affect Louisiana. Here's Paul. We have with us today Paul Stone. Paul Stone is the conservation forester and senior forester for Crosby Resource Management, which is down in Beauregard Parish.
Beauregard, Allen, Rapides, Vernon, and Calcasieu.
Okay. Good wide area. Paul, welcome. I'm really glad you're taking time to spend with us today.
Thank you, Jeff.
And Paul, also at the LFA, he is the chairman of the Endangered Species Committee. We like to keep watch on what's going on with the latest endangered species situations and species that have come up to be threatened or potentially listed. So Paul watches all that and keeps up with all that. Let's dive right into it. We have the Louisiana pine snake that has come up in recent years. That has been continued?
It is. They are listed as a threatened species, and there's been a lot of movement in the pine snake arena here recently, especially for us over in the western Louisiana. The Coxsackie National Forest, they're in the process of releasing over 150 snakes this year.
Wow.
Over on the Coxsackie on the Vernon district. And so that will have a pretty big impact on things over there. There's a lot of concern from private landowners and companies as to what kind of impacts that will have releasing so many snakes.
Yeah.
And, whether there are protections for landowners. But with that many snakes out there, folks are afraid that they're, of course, going to run into a snake during harvesting or other forestry operations.
Yeah.
And wanted to know if there were any protections for them, being that there are so many released in their areas.
Yeah, well, but there are 4D programs that allow for accidental takes during harvesting or during planting, things like that?
There are, and there's even some additional protections for folks over in the area around the Coxsackie, within a 2-kilometer radius of the Coxsackie. And, of course, in holdings within the Coxsackie, there was a biological opinion issued by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that grants some protections for the landowners who are doing activities that are considered otherwise legal activities. So basically, if you're logging or harvesting or doing forestry regeneration that is normally done and something that is legal, then you have those protections in case you did accidentally take a snake. So take being a legal definition for when and there's some movement in that area as far as the definition of take.
Okay.
How
did they define take? I mean, what we're talking about accidentally killing a snake.
Killing a snake or in the last number of years, or decades, I should say, basically, take has been, you could have a take where you actually accidentally kill a snake, harm a snake, or also if you were to destroy habitat where the snake is inhabiting, you could have a take by habitat. And so there's a lot of discussions going on in different interpretations within the Fish and Wildlife Service and the current administration as to what that definition is. There's been some Supreme Court activity on that. What is take? Is it a hard definition? Is it more of a loose definition? And the current administration and the Supreme Court rulings have been more towards a take should be something where you are actually killing the protected animal or bird or whatever is being protected.
Yeah.
And they're getting away from take by habitat and these looser definitions of what take has been considered.
How do we get to definitions where take is destroying or harming habitat for a species?
In almost all cases, those are the result of legal actions where there's been some harm or some loss of habitat, maybe that's considered critical habitat, that there's a limited number of resources and a limited population, and if some of that is destroyed intentionally or for a non-natural biological reason, then there have been lawsuits and basically court definitions have come out that you have a take by habitat. You've destroyed the habitat of say the gopher frog or gopher tortoise or a particular species. Yeah. And so that's how we end up with that ever expanding definition of what was take. And so now we're in a period where they're reining back in some of those court issued definitions,
which actually makes a little more sense. A take would be the destruction of an animal,
right?
Be intentional or unintentional. I imagine the penalties might be different, or are the penalties different? Whether it's accidentally during some sort of legal forestry work or an intentional thing of killing it.
Well, other than the protections from a 4D rule or a biological opinion, take where you actually harm the animal. Again, if it's otherwise legal activity, you have protections.
Okay.
But if it was kind of intentional, where you may have destroyed a snake's burrows, the snake is so heavily dependent on the pocket gophers. If you knew there was a colony of pocket gophers and they were pretty certain that there were snakes inhabiting that location, if you destroyed that habitat, you might have an issue there where they assume that the snake was in those tunnels. Because they spend so much time underground, it's really hard to know. That was one of the difficulties in even listing the species, because they spend so much of their life underground and they're hard to survey and hard to count, that it's very difficult to know where the snake is at any time.
So they know that they've released 150 snakes in the Vernon area, and they don't have an idea how many snakes were in that area to begin with. So, I mean, how does that work? Is 150 going to tip the population where there's too many? Will there be enough pocket gophers for those number of snakes to survive? I mean, if you don't really know,
that's right.
How do you list that?
That's right. That's the difficulty in some of my questions, because things were done there. They were looking at all of these zoo-reared snakes and needing homes for them, and looking at putting them out across their previously known range. There wasn't a lot of public input involved in that process. So what my questions were, what is saturation? What's going to happen? Were all of the snakes being put out in what is considered suitable soil habitat? Mm-hmm. Is it sandy? Are there pocket gophers there? Do we know if there were existing pine snakes in those locations? They've been difficult to trap, and I was involved in trapping 20 years ago looking for the snake, and we never caught one in any of the snake traps in 2 years of trapping.
Wow.
So but we're pretty certain they were in the area, but they just don't come out above ground and follow drift fences and things that we use to guide them into the traps.
Well, they only move if the population of pocket gophers or whatever food source that they have, since it's pocket gophers most often, they only move when that's depleted.
Well, you'll have some expansion. Say they lay some eggs and those young are then hatched. They'll be moving on. They're like other populations where other species where they do move to new habitat and expand their range, and that's how populations move. And so there's a few reasons for them to pick up and move. The fear is with a lot of our forestry activities is, of course, when we have heavy equipment in an area, the ground vibrations may chase them out of the gopher burrows, and we could accidentally have a situation where they're moving out of that gopher colony and moving to a different area, and we end up with an accidental encounter with them.
Okay, well that makes sense. But have you ever known anybody with performing a timber harvest and accidentally killing a Louisiana pine snake?
The only ones that I'm aware of did occur a number of years ago on U.S. Forest Service harvesting activities, and I believe they were both in Texas. And it was that situation, I believe, where the equipment probably chased them out of the gopher tunnels, and as they were looking for a new home, they were accidentally run over.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that is something that you expect. Do you have? Well, let me ask this way: do you expect anything to change as far as the Louisiana pine snake and its threatened status, and going forward with any new rules that might help or hinder timber harvests?
I don't think it will impact our timber harvesting much at all. We'll, in areas, again, as they expand their range and move out, we will probably have to do more in the way of surveying, maybe prior to harvesting, to see if there are gopher colonies that we need to protect. It's kind of like the gopher tortoise, where you would flag it off an area where the gophers are, and that way you can just stay away from there with equipment, give them a radius, a buffer. Mm-hmm. But of course, the trade-off for that is then you're not improving their habitat. Well, one of the things they need for the gopher is you need sunlight to the ground to create the herbaceous cover that the gopher likes to eat. And so if you don't get sunlight to the ground, you won't keep the herbaceous cover that the gopher needs.
So the gopher then will move on if its food source is depleted.
Correct. And so forestry is good for the gopher, which is then good for the snake as well. So it's a balance of trying to do as little disturbance but accomplishing your forestry goals.
One of the recent species that was listed as, I'm not sure if it's I guess just threatened in the South, the northern long-eared bat.
Yes,
that's in Louisiana. They've been found in Louisiana.
There are, and so mostly North Louisiana. The problem with our bats is the hibernacula, which is where they overwinter, and all, which is mostly caves and similar structures, maybe old buildings or whatever. The bats are themselves carrying a white-nosed fungus that they're picking up at other locations, and then depositing it in the new locations where it grows, and then the white-nosed fungus basically takes that, makes things unsuitable for the bat while he's trying to hibernate. Mm-hmm. And so they wake up from their torpor where they're somewhat asleep, and expend energy over the winter that they normally wouldn't have to do. They would basically be waiting for springtime to become active again, but they become active, and so then it requires more of their stored energy, and so by the springtime they've used up a lot of their reserves, and so they're in effect starving to death. And so the thing about not only Louisiana but across the South, we don't have a lot of caves for them to move into. So they're using other habitat, trees and hollow trees and forks. they're more dispersed. We have very little of the area to be infected by the white nose fungus. So we actually have habitat that's very helpful for the.
That's what I say. Well, even in the South, Louisiana especially, I say especially, but in Louisiana as part of the South, we really don't get that cold in the winter. So there are a lot of days where I would imagine the temperature is high enough that they aren't in a torpor state.
That's right. They're active. We would consider it most of the winter.
Yeah.
We have warm enough days they can be up, and you'll see them around your home or your farm, not necessarily the long-eared bat, but other bats that are out moving and catching mosquitoes. As long as you have mosquitoes active, which for us is most of the year, and bugs, they will be able to go out and forage. So, and
I'm sure there's no shortage of insects for bats to eat in Louisiana. That's
right. So I think probably, in some of the statistics I've heard is that we've lost 90% or more of the bats across their range already from the white nose fungus, all the way up into British Columbia that they've been lost. And so I think the southern populations will probably be extremely beneficial to maintaining the bats, keeping the bats.
Are there programs where the northern long-eared bat will be captured in the South and then relocated in northern areas where the population has declined? I
haven't heard of any of those yet. I think they kind of feel as long as the population is strong towards the South that the natural movement will probably be adequate for them to move back into places. They're really more concerned with how do we control either the white nose fungus or the bat's ability to fight off the white nose fungus, their resistance to it. And if they can get to a point where the bat is either resistant, like some of the species that, say the Texas bats, the bats over in West Texas and all, seem to be resistant to it. If they can figure out how to increase the resistance of not only the white nose, the northern long-eared, but also the tricolored bats, which have also been listed now also. So we have a second species that we'll be concerned about. That's going to be the main thing. How can we get them resistant, or is there a way to control the white nose fungus in the hibernacula?
I wonder if the places out in West Texas and all where they have more of these bats, is it resistant because it's just a drier climate? Is it that the fungus doesn't spread or grow as well as maybe a more humid or moist climate in the northern part of the United States?
Well, I think in the caves and rocks where it's been found out there, it seems to be there, but I think it's more species specific as to which ones are resistant to the. So the species that are resistant to it, maybe they can isolate that resistance, and maybe that's something that can be worked with. But it's really early in kind of the study of that, because it moved so quickly across the country and impacted the bat populations, a number of species, but all the way from the East Coast to the West very, very quickly.
Wow. Another recent one making the list has been the Monarch butterfly. Is that correct?
From what I understand, the Monarch is... Yeah,
is it being considered, or is it already determined?
I'm not certain, actually, if they have listed it yet. It was under consideration to be listed the last time I checked. And I'm not absolutely certain if it's been listed as a threatened species yet or not.
Okay. How could that affect forest landowners?
Well, of course, they're migratory, and it takes them a number of generations to actually migrate from their habitat in Mexico all the way up to Canada and back. It's an amazing species in that multiple generations later, by the time they've migrated to Canada and all the way back to Mexico, and they can go back to the same tree their ancestor hatched from.
Wow. In
Mexico. So it's pretty amazing. The problem we're seeing, of course, is similar with other insects and pollinators. We're having a dearth of pollination in species and habitats that provide the pollinators the feed that they need.
Yeah.
So really, it's not. They're kind of almost a bellwether species, kind of like the red cockaded woodpecker. If we have habitat for them and then the other pollinators will also benefit.
Okay.
But there's two populations. There's a western population and a kind of a central population, and they're at different levels. In California, as opposed to central U.S., they have different population levels, and so it's somewhat different for those two.
Are they in decline about the same rate? Is the central monarch butterfly on decline as much as the western?
I understand, as I understand it, the central is a little more in decline than the California western population that goes down the coast. So, yeah, I guess there's enough undisturbed or less disturbed government areas that provide the pollinators the habitat they need out there. So development is a big problem for those monarchs as they come through.
That's what I was going to ask. What are the things that make it more difficult for the monarch butterfly?
Yeah. Monarchs are like a lot of species, natural forest conditions such as prescribed burning is a great benefit to the herbaceous species that produce forage for the monarchs and other pollinators.
Yeah.
And so for the last 150 years, Smokey Bear's been telling us we've got to put those fires out.
Yeah.
So we've lost a species, and a lot of our endangered plant species and rare plant species that fall under Natural Heritage Program protections, those are really fire dependent species. And so that's really one of the reasons why they're rare, is we've reduced the amount of fire that they need. A lot of species, it's like longleaf pine. It's not necessarily that everybody says longleaf loves fire, and these plants love fire. Well, a lot of times it's not that they love the fire, they just hate competition, and fire is the natural means of reducing the competitors to those species.
Oh, okay. And it adds a little bit nutrients to the soil as well?
It does. It will release a little bit. You'll lose a little bit of nitrogen that volatilizes in a prescribed burn, but the other, phosphorus and potassium can be released and recycled, and it's like a shot of fertilizer. So, but you're also increasing the fire or the sunlight that gets to the ground, and so that extra sunlight creates the habitat for those plant species.
Okay. So you talked about plant species. What plant species are we talking about for Louisiana that could affect forestry or causes forestry to maybe do something different, or maybe is helped through forestry activities?
Well, pretty much our normal forestry operations, our thinning, even our clear cuts, where we control the woody competitors. A lot of our woody competitors that we basically have to fight with continuously, like wax myrtle, bayberries, yopon holly, and a number of species. Those are really native, but their niche is downslope towards creeks and rivers and in bottoms. And actually the lack of fire has allowed them to migrate upslope and out into our upland habitats. And so they occupy sites. And if you drive by, and of course all of our hunters know, we have a lot of areas that are almost impenetrable because of the yopon and wax myrtle. And so fire is our main way of controlling it. But if it gets to a certain point, you can't control it with fire. You'll reduce the vertical structure, the height of them, but you won't eliminate them. You can only do that once they've escaped and gotten to a certain level through herbaceous, spraying. You'll have to spray them with a herbicide.
Oh, and does that cause problems?
No, we use selective herbicides that target those woody species because we're trying to use herbicides that will leave our herbaceous covers alone. So a lot of our normal forestry activities only benefit a lot those species that come back because they've got sunlight. And then, it's like managing deer habitat. They like the edge effect. They like open. They like a lot of sunlight, and it will remain somewhat open for a number of years. And generally, by the time it's closing in, you're starting to lose that. It's time to thin. Yeah. And so you'll open it back up, get that sunlight back to the ground. We'll do an intermediate operation where we may release our pine trees, but again, that can help our herbaceous species as well. Okay. So the plants don't have the legal protections as, say, insects or mammals or birds.
Oh, they don't.
They do not. You're not going to get a ticket or be fined for actually running over plants. We do it as a matter of protecting the environment and being good stewards of the forest. And anybody that's third-party certified as sustainable, we're all protecting it and looking at ways of protecting that, just as to show that we are managing sustainably.
All part and parcel of what you do to keep the forest healthy.
Yes, okay. Yes. Probably one of the smartest things I ever heard regarding that, one of my professors, he's still active, Dr. Kroll, James Kroll, he told me years ago that the more occupied niches you have, the more efficiently you're using sunlight that's coming to the earth, and the diversity basically increases the health. So the more diverse you can keep your forest, the healthier it is, the more efficiently you're using sunlight, the less of a problem you have with things like climate change. Mm-hmm. So one of the best things we can do is keep our forests healthy.
Okay. What other things are coming up with the endangered species? Are there any other species we haven't talked about that are on the radar for Louisiana?
I think at this time we're pretty much stable as far as new listings. I think the bats will probably be having more of an impact. We will be probably looking more towards the state and the Natural Heritage Program at identifying areas where the bats are found, and we'll have to do more to protect known hibernacula. I think probably when our roads need repair and culverts need replacing, we'll probably be doing more towards looking, making sure that we monitor them and there's no bats in them. And if there's a way for us to mitigate when we do replace things, find a way to mitigate. But, the trend is for water quality protection, which is what is the heart of our best management practices, to get away from culverts. Culverts are considered less favorable. They do present problems over the years. They're expensive. They're expensive to maintain. And if you can replace them with, say, a rock ford or a bridge or crossing, it's better. But they seem to have a benefit, over a certain size for these bats. And so we may come up with some alternative habitat for them. But surveying, I think, is going to be a little more important. And I think we're going to be dependent on the Wildlife and Fisheries and our U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to tell us what areas we need to be more concerned about. What can we do to benefit them? How many snags per acre should we leave? Is there other living tree habitat? Can we leave more live hardwoods maybe scattered for them to use? Because they'll get up in forks and under bark, and they'll use living trees to a great deal.
Okay. Yeah. You had mentioned the red cockaded woodpecker earlier. There was talk of downlisting or delisting?
Downlisting. They have been downlisted.
They have been. Okay.
They have been. They're from endangered to threatened. And, we were a little bit concerned, actually, that they maybe had not hit the population goals before downlisting them that we thought was necessary for them to downlist them. Mm-hmm. But they've assured us that they're doing well enough that it can be done. And we wanted to make sure that the protections are not lost for them. We made a lot of ground up, grown a lot of birds. They've suffered a lot through hurricanes. Hurricane Hugo hit them real hard. When Hurricane Rita and Katrina and Laura and Delta in our region, those took out birds, actually killed birds and lost a lot of habitat. Wow. So they've done okay. We pretty much go out quickly, restore their inserts, and we've gotten the populations back in Southwest Louisiana. They've done pretty well. They've rebounded to some degree, but they're not fully back. But they have been downlisted, which will not have a lot of impact for private landowners, forestry operations. Pretty much the Forest Service and government lands, it will make a little bit of a difference too. But as far as private landowners, our protections are pretty much still the same. We set aside 75 acres pretty much for a group, and 3,000 square feet of pines for them to forage on. It has to be 10 inches in diameter and larger, 30 years old for foraging, 60 years old for nesting habitat.
Well, apparently the protections have worked because they've rebounded. Is there a practical difference in being an endangered species versus a threatened species? I mean, in form of degree, you can understand easily that if it's threatened, it's not as bad as endangered, obviously. But what does it really mean when it's downlisted to threatened as opposed to endangered?
It makes a difference from a legal standpoint in that when the law has been modified, a threatened species, you can have a 4D rule, and that really identifies our normal forestry practices that are considered beneficial for the bird, and so we would be able to do things that we would otherwise have to go through a consultation process with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service before we could do. And so the 4D rules are very important. And a 4D rule, once a species is listed the other way, uplisted from threatened to endangered, the 4D rules are no longer applicable. You cannot have a 4D rule.
Okay.
So then you have more consultation. And to me, I think you get less practices that are beneficial to the bird.
Wow. So for I guess for practical purposes, being downlisted to threatened, does that open up anything for forest landowners to do that they couldn't do when it was listed as an endangered species?
Well, it makes it easier to do our practices without having to go through the consultation process. So that's probably the biggest benefit to downlisting. It's just also basically a sign to the public that your population is moving in the right direction, that your management has been helping, and it's becoming less of an endangered species. It has less of a threat of becoming extinct, because literally that's what the definition of endangered is. It's in danger of becoming extinct. Right. And so when you move to threatened, it is less likely that species will be lost.
So wildlife benefits from managed forests.
It does. It definitely does. And we're able to do some practices that some retentions and things in our normal forestry that can benefit it. And I think in the long run, if they ever delist them, we will still continue forestry practices that will benefit it, even though they won't be legally required. Okay. Hopefully we'll get them to the point where they're back on the landscape.
Any other thing about endangered species that we should talk about today to help our listeners understand a little bit better what's going on?
Our forestry folks just need to keep an eye on the magazine and listening through the LFA to find out what changes. The LFA is pretty much our eyes and ears. And so as these changes occur, you do your part to get the word out to them as to what the changes are. And the magazine is a great place for them to pick that up. And we will monitor changes coming as administrations change, philosophies change towards endangered species a lot. And so we're seeing a number of changes and shifts right now in the philosophy that passes down through Department of Interior and then U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and then goes down to actual species management. So we'll try to monitor for those changes and explain, see how they benefit us, where we can provide input into those processes and let them know, because we don't want them to, have come up with some requirements that may be making our job more difficult, which in the end means we are able to manage less for an endangered species. So that's about all we can do at this point. I don't see anything immediately on the horizon in the South that's going to impact us.
Do you find that there is a general understanding that general forest practices done well and following best management practices is a benefit to most species than the emotional part of people seeing trees cut down and fear that, all this is going to be wiped out? And then it's not accurate, it's not true, but the forestry practices are quite beneficial. Is enough really understood about that in the government agencies that monitor these?
Well, the government agencies kind of are a reflection of the public. That's probably our biggest weakness in the whole forest industry, is getting that message out. What we do not only benefits the trees, we're providing the forest products that society wants and needs, but we're also protecting the species and benefiting them through our management. And there's so much that can be done in coordination between forestry for forest products and also to protect our endangered species. And we don't get that message out a lot enough. I hear from the public and they tell me, I literally get questions. Do you ever replant trees when you cut them down? They literally do not know. And they may have driven by miles of replanted trees to get wherever we are, and they just don't realize that those trees were all planted. And there was a lot of work that went into replanting them.
Yeah. I think that's true. They're quick to see a clear cut off the interstate, and not necessarily 3 or 4 years later when there are nice new trees growing up everywhere. I don't think that's noticed as much, at least in my experience. That's what I've noticed.
In helping with the Louisiana teacher tours and the Texas Conservation Institute, we find that teachers are a great reflection of that. They'll come in and say, not understand what we're doing for wildlife and for endangered species and plants and the entire environment. And it takes a week of training for them. But I think they do take it home and then pass that on to their students that, forestry is really good, not only for them and their futures, but it's also great for our environment.
Okay. Paul Stone, who is the conservation forester and senior forester for Crosby Resource Management. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate all that you do for LFA, and especially keeping tabs on endangered species, because that is important to our future as well.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for listening to Mind of the Forest. This episode is sponsored by First South Farm Credit. First South is your premier rural lender. With over 100 years financing timber and agriculture, they have the expertise you're looking for when financing rural property. If you're looking to purchase or refinance land, call your local First South Farm Credit office or find them online at firstsouthland.com. If you'd like to learn more about sustainable forestry, the SFI, the LFA and its programs, and how you can be part of an organization that supports landowners, loggers, and the forest products industry in Louisiana, check out our website at laforestry.com. You can send me comments or suggestions by email at jzeringue@laforestry.com. That's jzeringue @laforestry.com. You can also check out the show notes for our contact information, as well as the contact information for Paul in this episode, by going to the show notes. You can subscribe to The Mind of the Forest by clicking on the subscribe button on your favorite podcast app. Be sure to tap on the notification button as well. That way you'll know when a new episode drops each month. Thank you for doing that. We really do appreciate it. And remember, at the Louisiana Forestry Association, we're minding the forest for you.